Cowboy saw Apache driven from the market, and the coin he caught exposed their crime. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Jack Thompson had spent most of his life out in the open plains, far from the hustle and bustle of town life. He was a cowboy through and through, his days filled with working the land, taming horses, and looking after his cattle. He was a man of few words, content with the silence of the vast stretches of land that surrounded him. Jack didn't mind the solitude. In fact, he preferred it that way. His ranch was his world, and he was perfectly content to live in peace, away from the distractions and judgments of others. But that peaceful existence was about to be shattered. One hot afternoon, Jack decided to take a rare trip into town. It wasn't a journey he made often, but he needed supplies for the ranch. As he rode into the small market square, he noticed a commotion near the central stall. A woman, an Apache woman, was being forcibly removed from the market by a group of townsfolk. Her arms were pinned as she struggled against the hands that gripped her. Jack could see the fear in her eyes, the desperation in her movements. He knew trouble when he saw it, and this was nothing short of that. He'd heard stories about how some folks treated the Apache, but seeing it firsthand left a sour taste in his mouth. The crowd was jeering, shouting things at her, though Jack couldn't make out the words from his distance. His instincts kicked in, but he knew better than to get involved without understanding the full picture. He watched for a moment, wondering if the woman had done something wrong, but the more he watched, the more it seemed that the crowd's treatment of her had nothing to do with justice. It was purely out of hatred. Just as he was about to ride over to see if he could help, something caught his eye. The woman had dropped something as she was shoved away from the market stall, a small silver coin. Jack's eyes immediately locked onto it as it rolled across the dirt. Without thinking, he leaned down from his saddle and grabbed it, turning it over in his hand. The coin was old, worn, with intricate markings around the edge. Jack could tell it was no ordinary coin. It had significance, something more than just currency. He had no idea what it meant yet, but as he stood there, still holding it, the truth began to unfold in his mind. Something wasn't right, and the coin, now clutched in his hand, seemed to be the key to unraveling the mystery of what was really happening in that market. He could feel the weight of it, the responsibility of what it might reveal. The coin wasn't just a piece of silver, it was a thread, one that would soon lead him to a crime that had been carefully hidden in plain sight. As he looked back toward the woman being driven from the market, Jack knew that this moment would change everything. The injustice she faced wasn't just a random act of cruelty, it was part of something much bigger. And now, he was about to find out what that was. Jack rode his horse slowly toward the center of town, the weight of the coin still heavy in his hand. He hadn't let go of it since he picked it up from the dusty street. Something about it didn't sit right with him, and he knew it wasn't just a piece of metal. As he approached the edge of the market, the voices of the crowd continued to echo in his ears. Ayanna, the Apache woman, was gone now, but her departure left an uncomfortable silence in the air. The people who had chased her off were still lingering, whispering among themselves, casting glances at each other, as if nothing had happened. But Jack knew better. He could feel the tension in the air, the injustice that still hung there like a dark cloud. Jack reached the edge of the market, and dismounted his horse. He walked to the stall where Ayanna had been moments ago, now abandoned. There was no sign of the commotion from before, just empty crates and the faint smell of fresh produce. But as Jack looked around, his gaze fell on something. It was a piece of cloth, stained with dirt and something darker. He kneeled down and picked it up. It was part of a dress torn and neglected, but he recognized the pattern. It was the same one Ayanna had worn. He felt a pang of guilt. He knew he should have done something. He should have helped her. But now, all he had were questions. He stood up, clutching the piece of cloth in his hand, and scanned the crowd. No one was paying him any attention. It was as if they had already moved on, forgotten about the wrong that had just been done. Jack wasn't like them. He couldn't just forget. He looked down at the coin again, turning it over in his palm. He knew this wasn't the end of it. The coin had to mean something. He couldn't shake the feeling that it was connected to something bigger, something more dangerous. Jack walked toward the town sheriff's office. He wasn't sure why, but he needed to speak with someone who might know more about the people who had been involved in driving Ayanna away. As he entered, the sheriff, a middle-aged man with a weathered face, looked up from behind his desk. "What brings you in, Thompson?" the sheriff asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. "I've seen some things today," Jack replied, his voice steady but with a hint of urgency. "I need to ask about the people who were involved in driving a woman, an Apache woman, from the market. And I found something that might explain why they were after her." He held up the coin. The sheriff's eyes widened slightly when he saw it. "Where did you find this?" he asked, leaning forward in his chair. Jack explained what had happened, how he had witnessed Ayanna being driven off and how he had found the coin. The sheriff listened carefully, his brow furrowing as he processed the information. "This coin," the sheriff muttered. "This isn't just any coin. This has the mark of the old settlers who've been causing trouble around here for years. You might have stumbled onto something bigger than you realize." Jack's heart raced. "What do you mean by that?" The sheriff sighed, looking down at the desk for a moment before meeting Jack's gaze again. "There are people around here, folks who don't want the Apache getting any land or rights. They'll do whatever it takes to make sure that doesn't happen. If they think this woman has something they can take, they'll stop at nothing to get it." Jack's stomach turned. He had known there was something wrong, but hearing it confirmed made it all the more real. "What should I do?" he asked. The sheriff looked at him, his face hardening. "You need to be careful, Thompson. These folks won't hesitate to turn on you if they think you're a threat. But if you really want to help that woman, you need to figure out what she's got that they want." Jack nodded, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But he couldn't back down now. He had to find Ayanna, and he had to uncover the truth behind the coin and the people who were after her. With a final glance at the sheriff, Jack turned and left the office. He had a feeling that this was just the beginning of something much bigger than he could have imagined. Jack Thompson's mind raced as he left the sheriff's office. The weight of the coin still hung in his hand, a silent reminder of the trouble he had unwittingly stumbled into. The sheriff's warning echoed in his ears, asterisk. "You need to be careful, Thompson. These folks won't hesitate to turn on you if they think you're a threat." Asterisk, but Jack was already past the point of turning back. He had seen enough cruelty and injustice to last a lifetime, and he wasn't about to let it slide. He had to find Ayanna, and he had to uncover the truth about what the coin meant. His first stop was the local tavern. It wasn't a place Jack visited often, but he knew the barkeep, a stout man named Bill who had been around town for years and knew everyone's business. Bill had a knack for hearing things that no one else did. As Jack walked into the dimly lit room, the sound of clinking glasses and low chatter filled the air. He spotted Bill behind the bar, cleaning a glass with a rag. "Evening, Bill," Jack said, sliding onto a stool. Bill looked up, his eyes narrowing when he saw the grim expression on Jack's face. "What's on your mind, Jack?" "I need some information," Jack replied, pulling the coin from his pocket and placing it on the counter. "You ever seen one of these before?" Bill leaned in, his eyes widening slightly when he saw the coin. "That's not something you see every day," he muttered, reaching for it. He examined it closely, running his fingers over the intricate markings. "Where'd you get this?" "Found it," Jack said, his voice low. "It's connected to a woman I saw being run out of the market today. An Apache woman. I think it has something to do with why she was treated the way she was." Bill's face hardened, and he glanced around the room to make sure no one was paying attention. "You're treading on dangerous ground, Jack. You don't know what you're getting into." "I'm not worried about danger," Jack said, his voice steady. I just need to know what this coin means and who's after her. Bill paused for a moment, his eyes flicking nervously toward the back of the tavern. It's tied to some old families around here, he said finally. The kind of folks who don't like seeing Apache people getting any kind of advantage. They've been trying to run them out for years, taking land and resources whenever they can. Jack nodded slowly, his suspicion growing. Who exactly are we talking about? I can't say names, Bill replied, glancing around again. But if you're looking for answers, you might want to start by talking to old Roy, over at the livery stable. He's been around here longer than anyone and might know more than he lets on. Jack stood up, his decision made. Thanks, Bill. I owe you one. Bill gave him a sharp nod but didn't say anything else. Jack pocketed the coin and made his way to the livery stable, his mind racing with the possibilities. As he walked through the town, the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the dirt streets. The livery stable was at the far end of town, near the edge where the open plains began. It was quieter here, the noise of the market square replaced by the soft sounds of hooves and distant birds. Roy was inside, as Jack had expected. The old man was brushing down a horse, his movements slow but steady. He looked up when Jack entered, wiping his hands on his trousers. Evening, Jack, Roy said with a grin. What brings you by? I need to talk to you about something, Jack said, his voice serious. I found something today, something connected to the Apache woman who was run out of town. Roy's face instantly shifted, the friendly smile fading into a hard expression. You're asking about that? He said quietly. You don't want to get mixed up in that, Jack. I don't have much of a choice, Jack replied, pulling out the coin and placing it on the counter. Do you recognize this? Roy stared at the coin for a moment, his weathered face betraying no emotion. Then he sighed. I knew this was going to come up sooner or later. He paused, glancing around the stable as if making sure no one else was listening. That coin's been passed around for years. It's tied to some folks who think they can control the land around here. People who don't care much for Apache rights. Jack's heart sank. What do they want with her? I don't know all the details, Roy said, lowering his voice. But I've heard whispers about land deals, about things they'll do to anyone who stands in their way. If that woman has something to do with it, they'll stop at nothing to get what they want. Jack clenched his fists. He had to find Ayanna, and fast. Where can I find her? Roy hesitated for a moment, then spoke softly. I can tell you where she might be, but you have to be careful. You don't know what you're up against. There's more going on here than just a coin. Jack nodded, the urgency of the situation settling over him like a heavy weight. Tell me where she is. Roy gave him the information, and Jack turned, determined to make things right. This wasn't just about helping one woman. It was about stopping a much bigger injustice. As Jack walked out of the stable, the first stars began to appear in the sky, and he knew that the road ahead would be dangerous, but he was ready to face it head-on. Jack made his way through the thick brush, the sound of his boots crunching against the dry earth the only noise that accompanied him. The night had settled in, and a cool breeze swept through the open plains, carrying with it the scent of the distant mountains. The stars overhead twinkled brightly, offering some light in the otherwise dark landscape. Roy had given him directions to a small shack by the river, a place he believed Ayanna might be hiding out. The air felt thick with anticipation, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. As he neared the shack, Jack could see a faint light flickering through the cracks in the wooden walls. He paused, taking a deep breath. He didn't know what to expect when he approached Ayanna, but he knew it was important. The coin he had found was more than just a piece of metal. It was a symbol of something much deeper, something that was tied to the injustice he had seen in the market. Jack knocked softly on the door, his heart pounding in his chest. He waited for a response, the silence stretching on longer than he liked. Just as he was about to knock again, the door creaked open slowly, and there she was. Ayanna. Her face was pale, but her eyes held a strength that Jack hadn't expected. You found me, she said quietly, her voice steady, though there was an edge of caution in it. I didn't think anyone would come. Jack nodded, his eyes searching hers. I found something. A coin, he said, pulling it from his pocket. I think it's connected to what's been happening. Ayanna looked down at the coin, her eyes narrowing slightly. You shouldn't have found that, she murmured. It's not meant for people like you. Jack felt a twinge of guilt but pushed it aside. I don't care about that, he replied. I care about you. And what's happening to you? She hesitated for a moment, her gaze shifting away as if considering something. Finally, she stepped aside and gestured for him to enter. Jack walked into the small, dimly lit room. The space was simple, with only a few belongings scattered around, nothing extravagant, just the bare necessities. The only other thing that caught his eye was a small wooden box, tucked away in the corner. What's going on, Ayanna? Jack asked, his voice softer now. Why are they after you? Ayanna sighed, her shoulders slumping as she sat down on a small stool by the fire. They've been after my people for years, she said, her voice carrying the weight of generations of struggle. We have something they want. Something they've always wanted. And they'll stop at nothing to get it. Jack took a step closer, his curiosity piqued. What is it? What do they want? She met his gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and resolve. A piece of land, she said. But not just any land. A place where our ancestors are buried. It's sacred to us. They know its value, and they'll do anything to take it. Jack's mind raced. The coin, the treatment she'd received in the market, the people who were chasing her, it all started to make sense. And the coin? He asked. Ayanna glanced at it again, her fingers lightly brushing against the edge. The coin is a marker, she explained. It's a sign of ownership. It shows that my family has rights to that land. They've been trying to steal it for years. My father fought for it, and now I'm the one they want to break. Jack's stomach tightened. So this is bigger than just you. This is about your people, your heritage. Ayanna nodded, her expression hardening. Yes. And if they get their hands on that land, it won't just be my people who suffer. It'll be everyone. Jack stood there for a moment, taking it all in. He had known that helping Ayanna was the right thing to do, but now it was more than just that. It was about doing what was right for everyone, not just one person. What can I do to help? He asked, his voice steady and determined. Ayanna looked up at him, her eyes searching his face for sincerity. You don't understand what you're asking, she said softly. This isn't something you can fix with good intentions. Jack walked over to the small wooden box he had noticed earlier. It was old and worn, with intricate carvings on the sides. He reached down and opened it, revealing a bundle of papers and a few more coins. These are my father's, Ayanna said, her voice thick with emotion. He kept them hidden, hoping to protect them. But they're all I have left. Jack picked up one of the papers and scanned it quickly. It was a deed of some kind, detailing the land that Ayanna's family had once owned. This is it, Jack said, his voice rising with a newfound sense of urgency. This is the proof you need. Ayanna shook her head, a bitter smile crossing her lips. It's not enough, she said. They have their own papers. Their own lies. Jack turned to her, his face hardening. Then we expose the lies. We fight back. Ayanna met his gaze, and for the first time, Jack saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. You're willing to risk everything for this? She asked. Jack nodded, his resolve unshakable. I am. With that, the two of them stood together, ready to face whatever came next. Jack knew the road ahead would be dangerous, but he wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not when there was a chance to make things right. Jack and Ayanna sat together in the small shack, the weight of their next steps heavy in the air. The documents Ayanna had shown him were more than just old papers. They were the foundation of her family's legacy, the proof of her rightful claim to the land that had been taken from them. Jack ran his hand over the surface of the papers, the worn edges and faded ink speaking to the years of struggle that had preceded this moment. Ayanna sat across from him, her face set with determination, but Jack could see the weariness in her eyes. It was a battle she had fought for years, and now, with the coin and the papers in his hands, Jack understood the magnitude of what they were up against. They couldn't just go into town with these documents and expect everything to be resolved. They needed a plan, a way to expose the truth without putting themselves in more danger. "We need to get these documents to someone who can help," Jack said, his voice firm. "Someone who can make this right." Ayanna nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "But who? The people in town are all tied to the same folks who want to steal this land. They won't help us." Jack stood, walking over to the window and peering outside. The night had deepened, the world outside bathed in the soft glow of the moon. "There's one person who might be able to help," he said, his mind racing. "But we have to be careful. He's not exactly a friend of the people we're up against." Ayanna looked at him, intrigued. "Who are you talking about?" "His name's Ben Hawkins," Jack said. "He's a lawyer from a neighboring town. He's been known to stand up for people who don't have the means to defend themselves. If anyone can help us make these papers legitimate, it's him." Ayanna stood up, her expression skeptical. "But how do we know we can trust him?" Jack turned back to face her, his eyes serious. "We don't," he said. "But right now, we don't have many options. We need to take a chance." Ayanna looked down at the documents in her hands, her fingers tracing the edges as if she were weighing the decision. Finally, she looked up at Jack, a quiet resolve in her eyes. "All right," she said. "Let's do it. But we have to move quickly. The longer we wait, the more time they have to cover their tracks." Jack nodded, his mind already planning their next move. They would have to leave the shack and head for Ben's town at first light. It wasn't a long journey, but it would be dangerous. They couldn't risk being seen by the wrong people along the way. They packed what little they had, the documents carefully wrapped and secured. As they prepared to leave, Jack paused at the door, glancing back at Ayanna. She had been through so much, and yet she carried herself with a strength that Jack admired. He knew this wasn't just about the land anymore. It was about her people, her family, and the future that had been stolen from them. He had no idea what lay ahead, but he knew that he was willing to fight for what was right. As they stepped out into the cool night air, Jack felt a surge of determination. They were doing the right thing. They were going to make sure Ayanna's family got what they deserved, and nothing, no matter how dangerous, was going to stop them. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but Jack wasn't afraid. Not anymore. He had seen what people were willing to do to hold on to power, and he was ready to do whatever it took to stand up to them. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft orange glow over the horizon as Jack and Ayanna set out on their journey. The air was crisp, the smell of the earth fresh and raw as they made their way along the narrow path leading out of the valley. The night had been restless, both of them unable to sleep, their minds racing with the uncertainty of what lay ahead. But now, as the first light of morning touched the land, there was a renewed sense of purpose in their steps. They couldn't afford to waste any time. Every moment counted. Ayanna, walking beside Jack, glanced over at him, her expression a mix of determination and quiet worry. She knew the risks they were taking, knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but there was no turning back now. She had trusted Jack, and he had proven time and time again that he was not like the others. He wasn't a man who would leave her to face this battle alone. Jack glanced over at Ayanna as they walked, his mind still running through the plans. He had been to Ben Hawkins' town only a handful of times, but he knew the area well enough to navigate through the rugged terrain. They would need to be careful, though. There were too many eyes watching, too many people ready to stop them if they knew what they were carrying. He couldn't help but wonder what kind of person Ben Hawkins really was. The lawyer had a reputation, one that seemed to straddle the line between honorable and shady. But right now, Ben was their best shot at getting the documents in the right hands. The journey was slow, and the distance to the town wasn't short. As the hours passed, the landscape began to change. The rolling hills they had crossed in the early morning gave way to more rugged, mountainous terrain. Jack led the way, making sure to stay on the less traveled paths, avoiding the main roads where they could be spotted by any curious travelers. Iona kept close, her eyes scanning the area around them, always alert. Despite the quiet, there was an underlying tension in the air, and Jack could feel it in his bones. As they made their way up a steep incline, Jack took a deep breath, his lungs filling with the cool mountain air. He had spent so many years working the land, riding the range, but this felt different. This wasn't just another day spent tending to cattle or mending fences. This was about something far bigger. This was about justice. He had spent too many years watching people like Iona suffer, watching the Apache pushed to the fringes, watching their land taken without remorse. Now, with this coin and these papers, he had a chance to right some of those wrongs. He wasn't sure what would happen when they reached Ben Hawkins, but he knew they had no other choice. They had to try. The sun was setting by the time they reached the town. The last light of the day cast long shadows across the buildings, giving the small settlement an eerie feel. Jack glanced over at Iona, who was silent now, her face pale under the fading sunlight. He could tell she was exhausted, but she didn't complain. She had been through so much already, and yet she pressed on, step by step, never faltering. "We're almost there," Jack said, trying to offer her some comfort. Iona nodded, but her eyes were distant. She had her own battles to fight, ones that Jack could never fully understand. They arrived at the edge of town just as the last light of the day disappeared behind the mountains. Jack guided them through the narrow streets, his eyes darting around, always on the lookout. He knew how quickly things could go wrong in a place like this. Ben Hawkins' office was located near the center of town, a small, unassuming building that looked no different from the others. As they approached, Jack felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He didn't like this feeling, the sense that something was about to change, but he pushed it aside. He had to focus. They couldn't afford to fail now. Jack knocked on the door, his hand lingering on the worn wood. He heard movement inside, and a moment later the door creaked open. Ben Hawkins stood in the doorway, a tall man with a weathered face and sharp eyes. "Jack Thompson," he said, his voice low. "What brings you here?" "I need your help," Jack said, his tone steady but urgent. Ben raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Come in," he said, stepping aside to let them enter. As Jack and Iona crossed the threshold, Jack felt the weight of everything they had come through pressing down on him. This was it. They were either going to succeed, or they were going to lose everything. But Jack wasn't about to back down now. Not when they had come this far. Ben Hawkins closed the door behind them, locking it with a quiet click. The small office smelled of old paper and leather, the faint scent of tobacco lingering in the air. Jack took a seat at the worn wooden table, his eyes never leaving Ben's. Iona stood near the window, her posture tense, as if she was waiting for something to happen. Ben paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. "You've got some nerve coming here with these," he said, his voice calm but laced with a hint of warning. "What makes you think I'll help you?" Jack met his gaze, steady and unwavering. "Because you've helped people like me before. Because you know what's right. And because you're the only one who can make this right." Ben stopped pacing and looked at him, his sharp eyes studying Jack. After a long moment, he finally sat down across from Jack, the chair creaking under his weight. "I've done things for people before," Ben said slowly, his voice quieter now. "But nothing like this. You're talking about taking on some very powerful people. People who don't like being challenged." Jack's jaw tightened. "They've been taking from people like Iona and her family for years. It's time for that to end." Ben exhaled sharply, running a hand through his graying hair. "I know the kind of people you're up against. They'll stop at nothing. This isn't just about land. It's about control. They won't let go easily." "Then we don't give them a choice," Jack replied. "We expose the truth." Ben's gaze flickered toward Iona, who had been silently observing their exchange. She finally spoke, her voice soft but firm. You don't have to do this, Mr. Hawkins, she said. If it's too dangerous, I'll find another way. I've spent my whole life running, but I won't drag anyone else into this fight. Ben looked at her for a long moment, his face softening. You've already dragged him in, miss, he said quietly. And I'm afraid there's no turning back now. The question is whether you're ready for the fight that's coming. Jack nodded, his resolve strengthening. We're ready, he said. We have no choice. Ben stood up, walking over to a large filing cabinet in the corner of the room. He unlocked it and pulled out a set of documents, placing them carefully on the table in front of Jack. These are the deeds, Ben said. The ones that were stolen from Ayana's family. They're the proof you need, but they're not enough. You'll need more than just these papers to take down the people who want to keep this land. Jack picked up the documents, his heart racing as he studied them. These were the key to everything. But Ben was right, they needed more. What else do we need? Jack asked. We need witnesses, Ben replied. We need people who've seen what's been happening. People who can stand up and testify. And where do we find these people? Jack asked, already knowing the answer. Ben's expression hardened. You'll have to go back to the town. Find the ones who've seen the corruption up close. The ones who've been forced to keep quiet all these years. It won't be easy, but it's the only way. Jack felt the weight of the task ahead, but he wasn't backing down. We'll do whatever it takes, he said. Ben nodded, his eyes flicking to Ayana before returning to Jack. I'm in. But once you start, there's no turning back. If you want to fight, you'll have to fight with everything you've got. Jack stood up, his eyes burning with determination. Then let's get started. Ayana's voice interrupted him before he could turn toward the door. Thank you, she said softly. You're risking a lot for us. Ben gave her a small smile, but there was little warmth in it. It's not about the risk, he said. It's about what's right. The words hung in the air as Jack and Ayana exchanged a look. They both knew this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be treacherous, but they were ready to face it together. Jack walked to the door, pausing to look back at Ben. We'll be in touch, he said. Sooner than you think. Ben nodded, his face serious. Good luck, he said, his voice a low murmur. As Jack stepped outside, the cool evening air hit him, and for the first time, he felt the weight of the journey ahead. They had a long road to travel, but they had one another, and that was all they needed to fight for what was right. Together they would take on the powerful people who had tried to take everything from them, and nothing would stop them from doing what needed to be done. The journey back to town was quiet, the weight of what lay ahead settling heavily on Jack and Ayana. They moved swiftly, avoiding the main roads and sticking to the shadows. The last thing they wanted was to draw attention. As they approached the town, Jack's mind raced. They needed witnesses, people who had seen the corruption firsthand, people who were ready to stand up for what was right. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the dirt roads as the town slowly came to life. People were finishing their work for the day, and the first few families were gathering outside their homes. Jack kept his eyes on the horizon, leading Ayana toward the edge of town where he knew they would find a few familiar faces. Stay close, he whispered to Ayana. We don't want to draw any attention. She nodded, her eyes sharp, scanning the area as they walked. Jack had lived in this town long enough to know the faces of those who were likely to help. But there were also many who had learned to stay quiet, to keep their heads down, not wanting to get involved in anything that might stir trouble. They made their way to the small general store at the edge of town. The store was a familiar place, a spot where Jack had traded cattle goods for years. The old man behind the counter, Sam, was someone Jack trusted. He was tough but had a good heart, and Jack had a feeling he might know something useful. As they walked in, the bell above the door chimed, and Sam looked up from behind the counter. His expression didn't change, but Jack could see the flicker of recognition in his eyes. What brings you two in here? Sam asked, his voice low and cautious. Jack stepped forward, glancing around to make sure no one else was in the store. I need to talk to you, Sam. It's about the land, Jack said, his voice barely above a whisper. Sam's eyes hardened, and he leaned closer. I don't want any part of that, Jack, he said, shaking his head. You know how things work around here. Jack's heart sank, but he wasn't giving up. I know, Sam. But this isn't just about land. This is about right and wrong. Sam sighed, glancing at Ayanna for a moment before turning back to Jack. I've seen a lot of things in this town, Sam said, his voice softer now. And I've learned that sometimes it's better to keep your mouth shut. But you're right. Something's been wrong for a long time. Jack felt a surge of hope. You've seen it too, haven't you? Sam nodded slowly, his eyes looking distant as if lost in thought. Yeah, he said quietly. I've seen things that don't sit right. But you have to understand, it's not just the land. It's the people who control everything. You're not just going up against the ones who took the land. You're going up against the ones who run this whole town. Jack felt his chest tighten. He had known it wouldn't be easy, but hearing it from someone else made it all the more real. Then who can we trust? Jack asked. Sam hesitated, glancing around the store once more before speaking. You might want to talk to Lila, he said quietly. She's been working with some folks who've been looking into what's been going on around here. She's seen things, and she's not afraid to speak out. Where can we find her? Jack asked. She's usually over at the tavern, near the back, Sam said. But be careful, Jack. People around here don't take kindly to troublemakers. If you start poking around too much, you might find yourself in deeper than you want to be. Jack nodded, the weight of Sam's warning sinking in. Thanks, Sam. We'll be careful. Sam didn't respond, but his eyes followed them as they left the store, his face clouded with concern. Outside, the town seemed quieter than before. The people had begun to settle in for the evening, and the light from the tavern flickered in the distance. Jack turned to Ayanna, who was standing a few paces behind him, her eyes scanning the area. Ready? Jack asked, though he already knew the answer. Ayanna nodded. Let's do this. Together, they walked toward the tavern, knowing the road ahead would be full of challenges. But Jack had made a promise to himself, and to Ayanna. He wasn't going to back down now. He was going to get to the truth, no matter what it took. The tavern was bustling when Jack and Ayanna entered, the low hum of conversation mixing with the clink of glasses and the creak of chairs. The air was thick, with the smell of wood smoke and spilled beer, and the light from the lanterns cast flickering shadows across the faces of the patrons. Jack's eyes immediately scanned the room, looking for Lila. He had no idea what to expect, but he knew she was their best chance at finding the truth. He made his way to the bar, keeping his steps steady but quiet. Ayanna followed closely behind him, her presence barely noticeable in the noisy tavern. Jack leaned against the counter, his eyes on the bartender. I'm looking for Lila, he said, his voice low and respectful. The bartender, a heavy-set man with a grizzled beard, looked at Jack with a raised eyebrow. Lila? He asked, as if the name was unfamiliar. Jack nodded, his gaze unwavering. She's been asking questions about what's been going on around here. The bartender paused, then glanced toward the back of the room, where a woman sat at a table, a drink in front of her. Her dark hair was tied back, and she wore a long coat that seemed out of place for the warm evening. She was watching them, her eyes sharp and calculating. Jack nodded toward her. That's her, he said. The bartender hesitated for a moment before nodding and turning to attend to another customer. Jack walked toward the table, Ayanna trailing just behind him. When they reached the woman, she looked up at them, her face giving nothing away. Lila? Jack asked. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. You're the one who's been asking about the land, she said, her voice steady but quiet. Jack took a seat across from her, and Ayanna stood nearby, watching the exchange closely. We need your help, Jack said. We're looking for answers. The land, what's been happening to the Apache? We know there are people who've seen what's been going on. Lila's eyes flickered for a moment, and she glanced at Ayanna. What's your stake in this? she asked, her voice guarded. Ayanna stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. This is my fight too, she said. It's my family's land. And I'm not going to let it be stolen any longer. Lila's gaze softened slightly, but her demeanor remained cautious. I know who you're up against, she said, her tone low. But it's not just about land. It's about control. About people who think they own this town. This valley, everything in it. Jack leaned forward, his voice steady. We know that. But we can't just sit back and watch them take everything from you. Lila didn't respond immediately. She took a sip of her drink, her eyes scanning the room as if weighing the decision. Finally, she put the glass down and looked at both of them. I've seen enough to know that what they're doing is wrong, she said quietly. But I'm not the only one who knows. There are others, people who've been forced to stay quiet, people who've been too afraid to speak up. Jack felt a surge of hope. Where can we find them? He asked. Lila looked at him, her gaze steady. You can't just go asking around, she said, her voice urgent. These people have eyes everywhere. If you start poking around too much, it'll put us all in danger. Jack nodded, understanding the gravity of what she was saying. We're not afraid, he said. We just need to know who can help us. Lila sighed, clearly conflicted. There's a meeting tomorrow night, she said. A few of us are getting together to talk about what's been going on. But you have to promise me something. You can't get anyone else involved. Not yet. Not unless we know they're on our side. Jack and Ayanna exchanged a look. This was it. This was their chance to get the truth, to finally fight back. We'll be there, Jack said firmly. Lila looked at him, her eyes narrowing. You're playing a dangerous game, she warned. But I'll be there too. I'll bring the others. We'll see what we can do. With that, she stood up, leaving her unfinished drink on the table. She gave a quick nod to Jack and Ayanna before turning to leave, disappearing into the crowd. Jack and Ayanna stood in silence for a moment, the weight of what they had just committed to settling heavily on their shoulders. They knew the next day would change everything. But neither of them hesitated. They were in this together now, and they would see it through. As they walked out of the tavern and into the cool night air, Jack felt a flicker of something in his chest. Hope. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was the only road worth traveling.